Right now, you're getting a first look at former Hartford police officer Joseph Magnano, who was formally arraigned today. Magnano is now charged in the shooting death of Stevie Jones. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Annette Montgomery. Today, questions about police use of force, accountability, and officer support were all on display in Hartford. And that's where we find Fox 61's Alicia Hercules to break down why today's hearing drew such a large response.
It was a busy day both inside and outside of the courthouse. The Hartford Police Department packed out the courtroom as former officer Joseph Magnano was arraigned. Members of the NAACP and the president of the Hartford Police Union were also in attendance.
The state is not looking for any modifications.
Former Hartford Police Officer Joseph Magnano's court appearance was brief, but his supporters were outside long before and after he entered the courtroom. One of his supporters, Sergeant James Rutkowski, is president of the Hartford Police Union. He says Magnano has their full support.
He believes that what he did was defended himself and the citizens and the other officers.
He also criticized the Inspector General and the warrant in the case.
The law enforcement community here is asking that their proper authorities investigate this warrant and an ethics committee, judicial ethics committee, reviews that warrant also.
Magnano was charged with manslaughter in the first degree after the Inspector General ruled he was not justified in the shooting death of 55-year-old Stevie Jones. In February, police were called to Blue Hills Avenue after Jones's sister reported Jones was having a mental health crisis. He had cut himself and already had a knife in his hand. When officers arrived, body cam footage shows he walked onto the sidewalk where he began walking towards the officers. Jones was asked by the responding officers to drop the knife several times as they attempted to calm Jones down. According to the Inspector General report, Magnano arrived on scene 5 minutes after the first officer's arrival. He shouted for Jones to drop the knife before firing 9 shots at Jones. He died from his injuries days later. Hartford Mayor Arunan Arlampalam fired Magnano in late March. The Hartford Police Union later filed a grievance against the city for wrongful termination. Some of those officers filled the seats in the courtroom during Magnano's hearing. Evelise Correa Brown, a member of Black Lives Matter 860, says the sight was disappointing.
Hartford police jammed the seats in the courtroom, and it was as if they were trying to block out supporters that came in for Stevie Jones.
Corey Betts, the Hartford NAACP president, says they just want the former officer to be held accountable for his actions.
Today is about accountability, truth, and the value of Stevie Jones and other humans in our city.
Magnano is free on a $50,000 bond. He is expected back in court on July 21st. In Hartford, Alicia Hercules, Fox 61.
To all units, proceed to your post assignments. All units, proceed to your post assignments.
That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the beast.
Yeah, baby, it's episode 35 of Probable Cause on June 16th, 2026. Greg Dillon, the FBI whistleblower, and yours truly, Jeff Norman, with you as we always are. And tonight we are pleased to have back for the third time Von Kliem, a use of force expert with the Force Science organization. They are, well, you can explain in a little bit exactly what they are, but certainly advocates of the police and also how to police. And you folks study various police techniques and you testify in court trials and so forth and so on. Von has a law degree. He also has a master's in criminal justice administration. And he is one of our favorites. And that's why we have him back. How you doing, Von? And how you doing, Greg?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me back again. And the fact that I'm one of your favorites means that you've got to increase your pool of guests, I think.
Oh, you're too modest. I mean that. You're a great guest. You have a new article out that you published on the Force Science website. Never Enough, Hartford and the Problem of Unlimited Hindsight. So this is not only the third time you have been with us, but it's the third time Greg and I have dealt with this topic. We also had a well-known criminal defense attorney on. What was his name again, Greg, a couple of weeks ago?
Frank Riccio Jr.
Yeah, Frank Riccio from Connecticut. And I got to talking on the phone with Greg about this. there is something about this case that has caught my attention. Now, I'm from Connecticut, so maybe that's part of it. Greg is also from Connecticut, and he still lives there. But you're writing about this not because you write about every use of force incident. There's something about this that might be a game changer, and I'd like to hear from both of you what it is about this case that might be precedent setting, that might help clarify where the line should be drawn, that sets it apart from other use of force controversies.
Sure. Greg, you want me to let you start on this one? Once I get started talking.
No, I'm eager to hear your insight on this. You are. This is right up your alley. This is especially made for you.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me on. Let me talk about the article. I do want to say, so I'm the president of Force Science, and one of the things I really want to make clear about our company is we are driven towards honest accountability, and let the chips fall where they may. We see plenty of cases of bad policing. We see plenty of cases of outstanding policing that gets indicted. We work civilian and police cases, and what our company and Dr. Lewinsky has for decades been committed to is this concept of honest accountability. And we just heard the NAACP representative talk about we just want to hold the officer accountable. Well, accountability has turned into too many places that if an officer shoots somebody, they have to go to jail. Otherwise, there's no accountability. We are committed to this concept of honest accountability, and you're going to start to see this fleshed out in this 3-part article series. And for the audience to understand, when we come into any case or any investigation looking for honest accountability, it's made up of 2 requirements. One, the standards have to be clear enough that an officer or a civilian can predict the lawfulness of their own behavior. It's kind of a due process argument, right? And they have to know what the standards are, and then we can hold them accountable to those standards, but only if those standards are clear. And that clarity comes not just in the words on the paper, because the concept of reasonableness in and of itself is a vague concept, but it's operationalized through training. It's operationalized through case law. And so with the concept of reasonableness, we have decades of cases and years of training that have sort of, what I say, crystallized the contours of that word. So the first thing we look at in any of these cases is what are the standards you're holding the officer accountable to? And are they clear enough that any of us could predict in advance whether what we're doing is going to meet those standards? And if you've read the article, you know that's a big problem in this case, right? The second part of honest accountability is you can't have expectations on humans, can't have that are beyond human performance capabilities. And so they can't be focused on everything simultaneously. If I'm focusing on a man with a knife in front of me, I cannot also be expected to know that the civilian who was just on my left has suddenly run off a different direction, right? I noted their relative position. I focused on the threat, and for an investigator later to say, well, that person had moved. So they weren't in an actual, imminent threat. Even if that's true, officers cannot be expected, because no human can be expected to have full 360-degree situational awareness. In fact, the opposite is what we expect. We expect hyper-vigilant focus of attention on that which is most threatening to them in that moment. And so you're going to miss auditory clues. You're going to miss different movements of relative position, all those common sense things that a lot of investigators across the country seem to forget. So,
all right, well, but Von, so I admit that I kind of babbled before when I was describing what Force Science does. So I think you've clarified that. But we teased tonight's episode by suggesting that this is a special case, a game changer. Maybe it might set a precedent. Is that was that just clickbait on our part, or do you believe it?
No, I think it is the culmination of academic arguments meeting the reality of policing. And what makes this unique is that there's a debate that has been an academic debate for years, which is this idea of officer created jeopardy or officer provocation. And the proponents of that, which is largely in the world of academia, have wanted to say, well, if an officer didn't do enough to avoid the attack, then they should be held accountable. And any subsequent use of force, they should not be privileged to use. So it's actually gotten to a point where if we can, in hindsight, say, well, maybe this would have worked or maybe that would have worked, we're going to strip these officers of their ability to use deadly force at that culminating moment. And then the other piece is, if we don't strip them of the ability to defend themselves, we're going to put them in prison if they do. And so while this has been widely rejected by courts, it's been widely rejected by police agencies over the years, following the George Floyd sort of onslaught, that kind of tsunami of police reform that occurred after George Floyd's death. All of that all those academic terms, all those academic concepts started getting codified in statute in some of the most progressive cities, some of the most progressive states. And so we started seeing these terms that have never been operationalized, like you must use the minimum force necessary. No human can know in advance what that is. You must exhaust all lower levels of force and all reasonable alternatives. Well, there's no end game to that. There's no limiting principle. If we, after the fact, just decide we can imagine something else you could have done, you've just stripped the officer of his ability to predict, one, his own behavior at the scene, but two, he's now subjected to unlimited hindsight after the fact and the judgment of someone who's evaluating that case in an air-conditioned office. And they suffer none of the consequences of getting it wrong. And so why this is culminating is because the courts have been very deferential to the police for decades. And it's because the courts have done a great job of recognizing, we all heard the tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving circumstances that police have to make these decisions in. But more than that, there is a level of predictability and uncertainty that officers just don't have. Their threat assessment is just an educated guess in the moment. Their response to that threat is another educated assessment or educated guess in the moment. And the courts have been very deferential to that reality.
I can really relate to this idea of meaningful notice and a limiting principle. It sounds kind of legalistic maybe to the average person, but really in layman's language, it's such an appeal to basic fairness, because what you're really saying, in a colloquial way of putting it, is tell the police what the rules are. You can't say they violated the rules if you're not clear as to what they can or can't do. And I hear what you're saying, this when you see exhaust all possibilities. What a couple of the other ones in Hartford that they...
Your force must be proportional. You must exhaust all reasonable alternatives, de-escalate whenever possible. Well,
yeah, whenever possible. That's a good one. So who's to say what that is? But on the other hand, Vaughn, we've got to hold the police accountable somehow. So are there other states or cities or police departments that have drawn the line more clearly so that the police do know where they stand and how to, is there some sort of a limiting principle in other cases?
Well, the concept of reasonableness has been left intentionally vague, and the courts have specifically said, we're going to stick with the concept of reasonableness because what is built into that concept is that, one, reasonableness is determined from the perspective of the person using force in the moment. Reasonableness is judged not in precision or consensus, but reasonable people can disagree, and that's okay. Reasonableness does not mean you have to be right or correct. It's an assessment of apparent threats, not actual threats. So when you ask for limiting principles, I think I've got 20 use of force principles that are generally widely, almost universally accepted. And I've been testing these across the country at conferences, at the AELE use of force expert symposiums and conferences, at attorney conferences. I recently released it to the IACP legal officers section. And what I'm trying to do is say, can we at least agree on these principles? And it's within those principles that you find reasonable expectations. And so foundationally, and again, I'm going to try to ratchet down. It sounds like a little less legalese. Foundationally, we do want to provide the officers notice of what's expected of them, but the evaluation afterwards has to sort of universally agree on certain principles, right? The same set of principles. And again, I said them and I'll say them again because these are being ignored. Reasonable people can disagree. You don't have to be right. Your response just has to fall within a reasonable range of options. And for those attorneys and those watching in your group, the reason this works is because judges understand it. When a judge does a probable cause hearing and the defense doesn't like the result, they can appeal it. And it's called an abuse of discretion because just like police, the judge is just exercising their best guess in the moment. It's just an exercise of discretion. And the Court of Appeals will say, even if we agree or even if we disagree with the trial court, we are not free to overturn or substitute our judgment for theirs so long as their judgment fell within a reasonable range. That is all police are asking for, that same concept. So that's where you find your limiting principles. It's through the case law and through those principles, those use of force principles that courts have recognized over the years. This new progressive language has come in. It has not matured. It has not evolved. It has not been tested. On its face, much of it just fails. It's void for vagueness. If you can't determine what it means in advance, it's too vague to regulate behavior. Then it's, in a legal sense, it's void for vagueness. And then the other thing is, if we expect cops to do things that no human can do, there's a defense under the law called impossibility. And so what's happening in these cases is that we now have academics coming in more than willing to testify against the cops. And all they'll do is they'll cite these aspirational progressive reform language like we're seeing in Hartford as though it's self-explanatory. He didn't use the minimum force necessary. Well, okay, how would he have known what that was, right? And they sort of ignore the reality of human performance, especially during critical incidents. So we could do that part all day because that's kind of our unique offer, is identifying what are the psychological, physiological, and environmental influences on perception, decision-making, thinking, or cognition, and then ultimately performance. They don't get to shortcut that. If you want to play in the world of evaluating police use of force, you have to come into the deep waters because this stuff is non-negotiable. And that's really all our biggest argument is. Why is this the culmination of it? Because in that report, the investigator actually says that the state has incorporated the concept of officer-created jeopardy. The Supreme Court has not addressed that recently. The Supreme Court has not taken a position on it. It is highly controversial. It is highly debated. And yet Connecticut has statutorily, in their view, incorporated
there's a thin line between, creating the jeopardy, as in faulting the officer, versus, well, what happened is what led to it. It's kind of like Trump on January 6th. They went to Congress and that whole thing happened because he riled them up. But does that mean it's his fault that it turned into a riot? I don't know if you think that's a weird analogy, but you see what I mean about the difference between, just because something follows it chronologically doesn't mean the person is at fault.
Well, it is almost always chronological, but it's also massively speculative. And we actually win quite a bit. This has not been very successful in courts. When we come in, people get it. They understand the limitations of what's being advanced. And so for that, so far it's been good. But we do not want this to pick up momentum. When the Police Executive Research Forum and the academics from George Mason and Charlottesville, Virginia, and South Carolina School of Law, they are heavily trying to advance these progressive reform agenda. And their rationale is that they want to elevate policing beyond the constitutional standard. It's by definition a reform effort.
You have from that justice. Very short. I should have written it down, but I know you will know it because it pertains particularly to this case.
Are you talking about Justice Brandow, Supreme Court Justice Brandow? He says detached.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Justice Holmes. I actually have your quote of Justice Holmes ready to go.
Oh, was it Holmes? Yeah, detached reflection cannot be demanded in the presence of an uplifted knife.
Is that the one you have in mind?
Yes, I'm sorry, that was it.
Am I a pro in a sexy red hat, or am I a pro?
Boy, that was great.
I missed it. I think I said Brandow, so now you got to go back and read my own. Is that Justice Holmes?
Well, it
But
might
yeah,
have been Brandeis, but in your article you said it was Holmes.
and it had to be Holmes.
Right.
Yeah, and there's other ones. You know, we the same thing is you know, the same thing, kind of tax reflection can't be demanded, you know, or officers aren't supposed to wait for the glint of the upraised knife, right? We don't have to wait until that final moment. And this investigation was supported by some really some tactical recommendations or considerations that I don't know any officer that would reasonably rely on, like pepper spray against a knife. You know, the idea that he had pepper spray and he didn't even try to use the pepper spray. And you can just hear the groan across the country from cops, like, on what planet have we been trained to use pepper spray against a knife? Like that shows a level of tactical lack of sophistication that the people who are familiar with violence, I don't care if they're civilians or cops, they understand the reality of deadly force assaults, the permanence of them, the uncertainty of them, particularly when somebody suffering from mental health condition is involved, as you saw in this case.
Also, consider with the pepper spray. Now, it was in the wintertime. Now, I don't know if it was a gusty day or not. I wasn't there. But when you're in that setting and everyone is in pretty close proximity to each other, that pepper spray everyone's going to get a taste of it.
Yeah, and that's why we say
everyone's going to have watery eyes, and now you're trying to keep your weapon trained on somebody, and at the same time you're trying to wipe the tears from your eyes. It's just not a good option.
What about if the cops wore gas masks or something like that? Would that
gas masks? Half of them didn't have tasers.
What's that? Oh, well, yeah, I didn't say that they had them to use. No. I didn't say they had them to use it. I'm just discussing, like, not only what happened in this case, but perhaps what the police could do in similar situations.
Your vision is so compromised with a gas mask that you almost cannot hit the target.
All right. What about? I asked Greg. I think it was last week's episode when we saw one of our police videos during the "Has It Happened to Greg" segment, and a police dog did a great job doing something or other. And I know they didn't have a dog here, so I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking, but just in similar circumstances in the future, or if they did have a dog, an attack dog, I guess it's called in this circumstance, could that have possibly been a good way to deal with Stevie Jones?
Well, yeah, all those tactical options are discretionary. They do risk benefits and trade-offs in real time. If a canine officer, I'm not a canine officer, but we certainly have seen canines hit people from behind that are armed with a knife and attack the arm with the knife or whatever one's extended. If they want to assume that risk, the risk is, and people don't think about this, we see this in grappling, and you'll see it with the canine. I'm gripping a knife, the dog hits that, you merely just grab the knife with the other hand and start stabbing. It's the same thing when you're grappling. You can control the hand, and you use 2-on-1 to control that hand, and the guy just uses the other hand and takes the knife out and starts stabbing. We do not teach officers to use intermediate force options against deadly threats. Now, it's tactics are discretionary. If an officer wants to attempt a taser against a knife assault, and they want to assume the risk, typically that means they have lethal coverage. So yes, officers are more and more trained to consider the use of a taser under the right circumstances with somebody that might have a knife, but always with lethal coverage, protecting them in case the taser is disadvantaged. I don't fault the officers for wanting to delay that ultimate decision to pull a trigger, and if they want to assume the risk, they can assume the risk. But each individual officer gets to make that determination, and every one of these officers was facing an imminent threat, an imminent deadly threat at every point that guy was within 10 feet of them. Right.
Well, let's look at a video clip. I'm sorry to interrupt, but before we go on much longer, because I'm sure some of the audience has seen this and some haven't, but even our audience who has seen it before hasn't seen this particular angle. And thank you, Vaughn, for providing it. Before I show it, I want to say the significant thing is you made a point previously about the totality of the circumstances are what's relevant. And when we see a clip from just a portion of an incident, we don't necessarily see everything that the officer saw just before that, or everything that the officers might know based on what happened the day before or sometime in the past. And in this case, most of the footage that's out there shows a very slow, lumbering Stevie Jones. Now, this doesn't really help Magnano because he wasn't there at that point, but still the point is worth making. Earlier, he did show some athleticism, some agility. I mean, it wasn't exactly Jim Thorpe. I don't think he's going to be in the Olympics, but he did show some
deceptively quick.
Yeah, to the point where you could, where it's relevant in terms of gauging how dangerous he is. So let's take a look at that. Did you want to say something
before you do? I just want to set the framework. When the officer shows up and they see somebody walking towards them, it's reasonable to infer that person could kick it into a different gear and to accelerate that assault, because we see that with some regularity. We see it with elderly people who can move suddenly and very quick. So when he shows up, the fact that he didn't see this previously is not as relevant as people might think, because it's reasonable to infer that he's capable of doing that. If the opposing side says that's an unrealistic inference, we just go to this video you're about to show to say not only was it reasonable, in this case, it actually happened to be correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So as I said, he's not exactly Jim Thorpe here, so don't expect too much, but it's a little bit more than what has been shown in most of the newscasts.
We don't want to shoot you.
It happens just a few seconds before we see him show some agility. There we go.
Drop the knife.
When a guy with that, even with that limited agility, has a knife in his hand, that kind of establishes he is indeed a significant threat.
Drop the knife.
So there's a lot of drop the knives, and we might as well let this go because this clip goes on for 4 or 5 minutes, and it ends with the Magnano showing up. So you want to talk over it, Vaughn?
Well, again, Magnano wasn't there for this part, but it's almost irrelevant. What we know is he is actively assaulting. He is attempting to stab officers. So his intent is very well established. So what we're looking for in any imminent threat analysis is intent, ability, means, opportunity. And if we don't know subjective intent, we're looking for willingness. In this case, the manner in which he's holding the knife, the sudden sprinting, the continued redirections, all of this, officers are trained to consider consistent with intent or willingness to inflict death or serious bodily injury. Physical ability is what we were just talking about. If he wants to, could he? At this distance, consider that previous sprint. How fast can he get to that, what is less than 6 feet at that point? Because that's about a 12-foot lane.
Yeah,
he can close that.
That's an argument for something you alluded to, which is that maybe these officers acted improperly. I know you don't want to fault them, but it's at least arguable that they did. I mean, even at one point, we saw in another clip that I don't have now, there was a female officer who was cautioning one of her colleagues to back up a bit.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say improper. What I'm going to say is it's their risk to assume. What I'm saying is they're facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury right now. If they don't want to shoot him and they want to delay, then and hope that luck is on their side, but they've just, these 2 additional civilians now finishing off their perimeter. All of this, the fact that they didn't does not negate the fact that he's a very real threat.
Just drop the knife, Stevie. Okay? Stevie, drop the knife.
Do we have another taser? Okay, can you drop it for me, Steve?
And I will say, as before Magnano shows up, if this guy would have stabbed any of these officers, we would have all collectively said, why did somebody not stop this man? It was very clear this guy was danger, and nobody did what they were sent there to do, which was to protect the community and these other officers.
Yeah, I might have mentioned to you when you were here previously that I was stabbed pretty severely in Long Beach, California a few years ago, and I was in the hospital for about 5 days.
Drop the knife, all right?
And then about a week later, I was talking to a cop who was the sergeant, who was the supervisor of the cops who responded to my situation. And after I was stabbed, my assailant attacked 2 other people. And on the 3rd attack, they arrested him. And the cop said to me, I'm surprised my guys didn't put holes in him. And even though I'm the victim, I was sort of taken aback and
Yeah.
kind of like thought, oh, maybe that's not quite the right attitude to take. So I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, because if the guy got away again and he stabbed somebody else, it would have been on them. And I think that's
Yeah.
exactly the point you're making, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's you hate to say it's on them because they have no duty to intervene, right? They have a duty to the public at large, not any one individual. But those other officers were free to exercise their discretion. They all recognized the threat he posed. I think their statements made that clear. Their conduct at the scene made that clear. They had their guns out. They were running from him for some reason. If the guy's not a threat of serious bodily injury or death, why are you running from him? Why do you have your gun out? And again, every one of them is free to assume that risk if they want. It doesn't mean that the officer who's decided this has gone on enough, now there's other people at risk, these other civilians and these officers, that if you're facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, that you can't use deadly force to immediately and decisively stop that threat. Back to the entire point of this article is Connecticut has added additional requirements beyond just, is he an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury? That's almost given in this case. I don't think anyone's really contesting that in this case. What they're saying is, given that he was, let's just assume he was a threat of death or serious bodily injury, did the officer do enough to avoid the use of deadly force to stop him? And that's where the question becomes, did he de-escalate enough? Did he do something that was so unreasonable as to provoke him? Clearly not. I mean, I couldn't disagree with the investigator more. This officer showed up and did exactly what all the other officers were doing. He came in, he gave actually a very conversational, drop the knife, and only escalated his voice and his arousal state when the guy turns towards him and starts coming towards him, what I think would have surprised any officer, right? Because it's so irrational to be surrounded by 4 armed police officers and then to initiate an assault again. You almost have to kind of go like, what is happening right now, sort of thing, because that's not something you particularly train for. And if you did, I would almost guarantee their trained response was deadly force, not pepper spray.
A minute ago, you said the officers don't have a duty to intervene. Can you explain what that means exactly?
Yeah, there's sort of a misconception that if an officer's called, they have to do something. Officers can just leave. Officers don't have to. Now, there's probably a statutory duty in a lot of the agencies these days, a statutory duty to intervene to prevent excessive use of force by another officer. So they've created that sort of duty to intervene. But an officer does not have a legal obligation to protect an individual or to enforce a specific law. They don't have to stop every car that commits a traffic violation. They don't have to respond to every call. I mean, it might be dereliction of duty and they can get fired for it.
That's different if, the police as an agency, they don't necessarily, at the dispatcher level or whatever, they make decisions on what to respond to. But I think it's different if there's some kind of very dangerous situation going on and the police are on the scene. This is, I don't mean to argue, but this is just very surprising to me. Greg, this is your understanding too when you were a cop, that you could just leave if you wanted to?
I don't know if I completely agree with that, but I don't know what you would point to that would compel you in one way or the other.
Well, let me make it even clearer. The opposing experts who are advancing these progressive reform agendas are advocating that police leave. They're saying if it's getting too dangerous and you're going to have to use force, then you have the option to just let the guy go. You can get him another day, because at the point of capture, if someone takes off running with a gun in their hand into the community, these same experts are getting on the stand and saying, you could just let him go. Because if you try to pursue them to the point of capture, there's going to be a high chance for a deadly force encounter. And then they're arguing, which you created, because you never had to chase him. So not only do they not have a duty, these progressive reform advocates are actually arguing that instead of confronting or arresting people who resist, let them go. And I mean this even in cases where the person has a gun, has threatened officers, and is running into the community. Just let him go. So,
but Vaughn, I think there's case law on that, right? Isn't there an outstanding case law on that where they say the officer is not obligated to effect an arrest on the scene if under the circumstances it would be prudent to go back at another time with an arrest warrant and make the arrest?
well, I don't know if it's case law that is even required for that. And I think we all hesitate because just like the look on your face, we wouldn't do that. Like, you're in that job to assume the risk on behalf of the community. You are showing up to assume the risk for the community, not to release it back into the community. So when I say officers don't have to, you can see a recent video on YouTube where the officer's just watching these people fight. There's like a bunch of people fighting right in front of him, and everybody's like, "Are you going to do anything?" He's like, "No, I'm not. There's 5, 10 of them. There's just one of me. I'll get some backs here." And he's just watching
Yeah, I
the
could
fight
see
like
where,
everyone else.
where it is asking too much of an officer. And in fact, I was already thinking about this question in regards to a couple of other incidents. I think we've all seen, police talk people off a bridge when they're threatening to commit suicide and stuff. And I wouldn't think that the officer is necessarily required to like go out on a bridge where there's danger of falling off or something like that.
Or the person grabbing them and jumping off.
Right.
Yeah.
And here in and we have there's a video that we're going to play when we do Has It Happened to Greg later. I hope you can hang out with us for that, Vaughn. But another video I don't have, but it's a big news story here in Wilmington where I live. The head coach of the women's basketball team at the University of North Carolina was out at the beach with her nephew, and he got caught in a rip current. And she went out into the water to try to save him, and then she got caught in it. And several guys, I don't know how many people altogether, I think there were like 4 guys who were nearby, who were young, strong guys who knew how to swim, went out to try to help. And one of them who was holding on to the nephew, or maybe it was the coach, I forgot which, and was in the process of saving them, had to let go because the water took over complete control over him.
Yeah.
And then cops showed up and jumped in, and ultimately everybody was saved. But that's what I thought. Well, what if the cops don't know how to swim, or they don't want to take the chance? Because look what happened to the big strong guy who went in, who was in the process of saving and then had to let go. So I was already thinking.
You've got to be, I have to be careful because different states are going to treat this a little bit differently. Certainly when we evaluate a case and we start to see that just let them go sort of language as a strategy by these opposing experts, we find that policy from that same agency that talks about cowardice and dereliction of duty and shrinking in the face of resistance. And we just hold them both up. Like, it can't be both ways.
Exactly.
And if you have an active shooter, I know somebody told me there was a cop who was charged for failing to respond to an active shooter at a school. Instead, he took a position of cover, was waiting for additional units, and they just saw it as cowardice. And so in having the same conversation, I got to go back and look. I think it was a Florida case.
Yeah, you're right, Vaughn.
Yeah, and so I don't want to speak too much. I know the details, but my point was, typically, unless you create a special relationship with somebody, for example, you go to a domestic and you arrest the husband and put him in handcuffs and have him sitting on the curb outside, and the female half comes out and starts beating him over the head with a flashlight. Because he's in your custody, you've created a special relationship, and so you do have a duty at that point to protect them. Outside of that, you can look at all these people in a lot of these jurisdictions and say, all right, everybody go home. This guy's dangerous. Get in your houses. We're leaving. And Greg, I think, and I both recoil from that because that's not why we become police.
Yeah.
Right. And so this idea that we've kind of taken a different direction, but this idea that we can go back in hindsight and start to reassess the risk on behalf of the officer, suffering none of the consequences, makes it very, very difficult from an accountability standpoint, right? Whether it's forcing them to intervene when we think they should have, or demanding that they don't intervene when we think they shouldn't. I mean, it puts them in a no-win situation.
Vaughn, I have a question that's related to this, but it's a little bit of a curveball, but I'm surprised that it hasn't come up in discussion prior to this. In full disclaimer, the current police chief of Hartford, I used to work with, so I do know him. But my question is, does the police union or Officer Magnano have a credible issue to challenge and say, we were we're under equipped or unequipped to handle these types of situations because of the fact, and then just say everyone on the department should have a taser and does not. Everyone should be trained on a taser and should have a taser. There should be, a supervisor should have a beanbag rounds or a pepper ball gun or some secondary non-lethal force that's above a taser and above pepper spray. What I'm saying is, can there a claim be made that the department is under-equipped or unprepared, and it falls on the administration of dropping the ball and saying, look, you go on enough of these calls every year that we should have more resources and more assets available in real time to respond to situations like this? You put the officers at a distinct disadvantage by not having those tools available to them in real time.
Yeah. Well, there's a concept of failure to train, which is different than failure to equip. I don't know of a mandate for specific pieces of intermediate force options, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea, if I'm doing a legal advisor, and I'll just do big framework stuff because I think it is going to be state by state. If I'm looking, I'm like, well, the first question is, can we anticipate a situation that we're going to send the officer to? If we can anticipate that situation, we then need to train and equip them against that situation. So if an officer is going to work in low light conditions, for example, then we need to train them to operate in low light conditions. And that's also probably going to require flashlights, for example. So at a minimum, we expect you to go into dark basements during the day. We expect you to work at night. So we need to equip you and train you in a manner that reflects those realities. And if we don't do that, there could be a failure to train argument.
Mm-hmm.
But when we just talk about a specific intermediate force option, that's what a taser is. It's a long-range impact weapon. That's what a beanbag round is. It's a long-term range impact weapon relative to where it falls in terms of its quality of force. And so I don't know of any cases, it hasn't been something I've had to look at in those type of cases that mandate a specific piece of equipment. Even body cams haven't been mandated unless the state mandates it. It's not constitutionally required to have a body cam.
They do mandate them now. But my point being that, tasers are a very effective, non-lethal option, but they're not 100% foolproof. In this case, because of the fact that he was a heavy-set gentleman and wearing layers of clothing, it was not effective.
Yeah, now the obesity part, I'm not so sure about that. I do think it probably had to do with the clothing.
Yeah,
I think you can knock a bull down with a taser if
I get it.
Right?
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that the prongs never made skin contact, so they weren't going to be effective on it.
Yeah, and you're right. So the intermediate force options against a deadly threat, why it becomes the judgment of the officer at the scene and their willingness to assume the risk is, I almost look at these cases like there's a green light. Right now, when that green light comes on, I recognize there's an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Deadly force is authorized, right? If I want to assume risk and try lower levels of force, because I feel like I'm either willing to assume that risk and on behalf of myself and the community, there's not a law that says I can't do that, right? In some of these states now, they've mandated you exhaust lower levels of force, right? Exhaust other alternatives and options, which then makes you go through this cataloging of potential things you might try, regardless of your confidence in their effectiveness. That is a huge problem, because when you compare it to how cops have been trained for decades under the constitutional reasonableness standard, which even state courts have adopted and incorporated by reference in their use of force, deadly force privileges, you'll start to see, it's another thing we do on cases is, if it's a state criminal case, well, it's not a constitutional case, but we'll look at their appellate courts, who will then be referring to the constitutional standard in interpreting that criminal statute. So it's incorporated by reference. So we have that entire body of law to rely on, right? So when we start to look at that reasonable standard, there's a few well-established things. Reasonable people can disagree. Cops are not required to use the best force or even a better force, so long as it's a reasonable amount of force. Cops are not required to try lower levels of force and hope for the best. These are Supreme Court guidance interpreting the Fourth Amendment reasonableness. And so that is why PERF has the Police Executive Research Forum really started, and some of these academics are activist organizations because they think that's the floor. They think that is the baseline standard, the constitutional standard. And, I've even heard, some of these advocates saying, well, you can do better than Graham. Agencies that are dedicated to doing great constitutional policing are now being shamed and ridiculed because they're not adopting something better than Graham, which is Graham versus Connor, which is the U.S. Supreme Court case that establishes that defines the reasonableness standard. That's evaluated through the lens of the officer at the scene, based on their training, education, experience, and reasonable inferences, without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, is actually in there. And so, because the constitutional standard was so deferential and reflecting the operational realities, that's why states like Connecticut had to statutorily adopt all these additional requirements, that some of which the Supreme Court has specifically rejected as part of the reasonableness. Where Connecticut has gotten in some internal inconsistency is they simultaneously cite to the Fourth Amendment's reasonableness standard, but then add all these additional concepts that shall be considered in determining reasonableness. But what they've ultimately done, because some of those are inconsistent with Supreme Court guidance, they've actually said, well, you have to be reasonable, which is the same word that's used in the Fourth Amendment context, but then they've added these additional requirements. So it's no longer the constitutional standard, it's reasonableness plus, right? And instead of calling it reasonableness plus or elevated standards, they just say, well, we're going to evaluate you for reasonableness. And in evaluating that, we're going to consider all these other things, including officer created jeopardy, which the Supreme
Court.
So
maybe the answer to my earlier question is no to the question, is this case going to establish new places to draw the line, or that it shouldn't? I think what you're contending is that the Supreme Court has already addressed this, and maybe what happened in Connecticut should be tested against the existing case law. Is that your position? I don't want to misstate it, but
my position is that the reasonableness standard is an operational standard that's been time tested and provides the latitude for the uncertainty and unpredictability cops have to face, and the variety of threat assessments and responses that cops are going to engage in based on their training and experience. A 1-year cop isn't going to be as good as a 5-year cop, but they both have to be able to legally operate in the same world. What I'm saying is the proponents of the progressive reform standards reflected in Connecticut, the academics who tried to advance that on policing. Stanford just put out a use of force model policy, which incorporates all of this nonsensical progressive reform language that is absolutely beyond human performance capabilities and so vague that no officer can know what to do with it. What I'm saying is they are specifically and deliberately trying to make it more restrictive for cops beyond the constitutional standard. They know what they're doing. It's deliberate. What they haven't done is they've completely ignored those concepts of honest accountability. No human can know in advance what these things mean. When have they reached the point that somebody later will consider that they've reasonably exhausted lower levels of force? When will they have reached a point where whenever possible, when is whenever possible, right? If you can always imagine one more thing. And what concerns me is if you have audience members going, come on, they're going to use common sense. I will just report that they're not. I'm in these court cases, and these academics and these opposing experts have taken this so far that they're proposing that suspects be allowed to pat themselves down or search their own vehicles. They're proposing that if somebody takes off running from you and it's too dangerous to chase them, just let them go. They're proposing that if someone stabs a police officer, they should stop, slow down, de-escalate, reassess the threat while they have a stab wound. That these are actual cases. And so I promise your audience, you probably lack enough creativity to appreciate how far these experts are willing to go to hold officers accountable under these new standards which again have no limiting principles and are only limited by the creativity of the opposing expert.
Right. All right. So this is a 3-part series, and part 1 has been published already at forcescience.com. I read part 2. Vaughn was kind enough to send me an advanced copy of it. I actually think part 2 is even better because you really get into what the situation is in Hartford, whereas part 1 is more of a general overview of the situation. And people can read it at forcescience.com. When is part 2 going to be published?
I think Monday we're gonna send it out. And yeah, I think Monday is when we agreed to put that out. We want to give it a little bit of space, have some of the discussion surrounding it, and then part 3 will come out 2 weeks after that. A lot of the comments on part 1 that we got feedback, we got overwhelmingly outstanding feedback from people who they just think they're crazy. They're being gaslit. They're just these executives, these police executives are being gaslit. They're being told that this is what the best modern policing does without any consideration for whether it's actually operational. And so these are conscientious police leaders who are trying to demonstrate excellence in policing and haven't slowed down to think whether this is something that is even possible to implement. And when they do, they intuitively know that that this doesn't make any sense based on their experience. It makes no sense what these guys are asking. And ultimately, if somebody finally validates that and says, yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's absolutely, it's either corrupt or just unsophisticated or just unjust. Accountability is what it is. It should be void for vagueness and recognize where impossibility lies. And understand that some of it, when I look at the people advancing it, some of them are white hats. They really believe they're doing God's work, and they're really just trying to reduce the number of police shootings, and they're good people. Some are just absolutely corrupt. Some of them are absolutely running on these anti-police campaigns. It's a power move, and so you have to see them for who they are, but you can't frame them all the same way. When we get some of our senior police executives and we can sit down and talk to them, they realize they're being gaslit. And so these articles are really partly designed to say, hey, if these people come knocking on your door with this nonsense, just say no. Just say no and shut the door. You don't have to debate them. You don't have to kind of, it's the mother lode of bad ideas for the reasons I've mentioned. And again, even as I was discussing this with the NAACP out in California a while back, I said, look, before we get started, can we agree on those 2 concepts? If we can agree on those 2 foundational concepts for honest accountability, then we could start the conversation. And at each point, I say, how would any human know how to do that? How would any human know when they've exhausted? How would any human know what minimum force is? How do you do an on-scene proportionality analysis when you're worried about getting stabbed, right? And so these vague balancing tests, again, the Supreme Court even said, which is why they're ignoring the Supreme Court. That's why they're making this criminal statutes, because the Supreme Court, again, has been so deferential to police. One of the things they said is you can't expect an officer to engage in this legal-like analysis, this formulaic legalized analysis in the middle of facing a deadly threat. We need to give them operational guidance, not give them a checklist, a 50-part checklist that they have to go through, whether it's, critical decision-making matrix or, policies that have 25 things that say the officer shall consider. Well, your audience understands probably intuitively that when you're involved in a critical incident, you've got 2 ways of thinking. You've got, I need to make a decision right now way of thinking, which is called System 1, fast and frugal decision-making. Or you have slow, deliberate, rational decision-making. And in policing, System 1 is what we expect officers to be engaged in during critical incidents. System 2, the slow, deliberate, rational decision-making, is when you have discretionary time, when you're not facing an imminent threat. So yes, officers should be rational in thinking and planning and using strategic responses when they have discretionary time.
When time allows.
Yeah, when time allows. And we have a way for them to determine that. The problem is the perf crowd and the progressive activists, because the Supreme Court was so deferential to this idea that came from Graham that officers are facing tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving circumstances, that they're like, well, they shouldn't be facing rapidly evolving. They should slow down. And so they believe that the police officer is fully in charge of how fast, what the tempo of these engagements are. And they completely ignore all the other government interests and law enforcement interests, like prevent escape, prevent access to weapons, detect crime, prevent crime, the efficient administration of justice. They just wave all that off and say, slow down, create space, buy time, and then negotiate from a position of cover. Well, that's great when you have discretionary time. But if slowing down, creating space so you can buy time and negotiate from a position of cover means the guy escapes, means the guy accesses weapons, means he gets back in his car, means then you've done those things by effectively ignoring all of your governmental interests, all your law enforcement purposes in the first place. And what they've done, quite curiously, is they've tried to weaponize officer safety, because cops, we all know, we base a lot of what we do on, well, we did it for officer safety. We maintain distance for officer safety. We wait for backup for officer safety. But there are circumstances. Now what they say is, well, it's not safe for you to chase somebody with a gun. So for officer safety, it's not reasonable for you to chase somebody with a gun. See, what they did is they've taken officer safety considerations, which we train officers in all the time to consider. But once an officer considers those potential threats and risks, it's then up to them to assume that risk and to respond in a manner that it reflects the reality of their skill set, their knowledge, their confidence, the weapon systems they have. But all that happens with the individual officer level. But what they've done is they said, well, you chased a bad guy with a gun. That's not safe. And therefore it's unreasonable. And since I'm going to use the word unreasonable in a tactical sense, I'm going to conflate that with constitutionally unreasonable, and that you now created the danger. And so we're going to hold you accountable by putting you in prison or denying you the privilege of using self-defense. And it's maddening. And they are absolutely gaslighting the industry.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Somerville John had put a question up there about Hartford in the crime rate. And I had posted an article on Facebook earlier in the week. The most dangerous city in Connecticut is New Haven, followed by Hartford at number 2. So if that maybe answers John's question.
All right. I'd like to move on to Has It Happened to Greg, but quick question about this issue, and my humble request is for a brief answer from you gentlemen. In the opening video, we saw a Black Lives activist complaining about all the cops who were showing up at court for Magnano's arraignment to support him, as if they were taking over the court and so forth and so on. I bet she would not complain if the activists were dominating the courtroom. But my question is, do the courts control this sort of thing in any way to try to keep things balanced inside?
First come, first serve, Jeff. If you get there late, you're not going to get a good seat.
Yeah, I think it's just practical. I like first come, first serve, but I've actually been in courts where the judge will say that half of the courtroom is for the defendant, that half of the courtroom is for the prosecution, or we'll say, the judge owns the courtroom, I guess is the bottom line. The judge owns the courtroom.
When the judge says that, it's for that. Does do the two sides play a role in like having a guest list, so to speak? Because otherwise, how's the court supposed to know which side you're on? People may not tell the truth which side they're on when they show up.
Well, if you want to get into the reality of it, that does happen, where people will sit on the side of the defense or sit on the side of the prosecution just to eavesdrop on what the family members are saying, listen to the attorneys, text the opposing side. So that can happen. Nobody's really policing or checking ideas to which side. If it's going to be highly contentious, the judge will give an admonition to the crowd, to the galley, and say, hey, if there's any outbursts, we're going to have you removed, right? And so they kind of have to self-police, or there's deputies in some of these courtrooms that'll escort them out pretty fast. And so it really does become judge dependent, the size of the courtroom, whether it's televised, and how much animosity there is between each side.
All right. Will you stick around for Has It Happened to Greg, Vaughn?
Don't forget my meme.
I'm ready.
Oh, okay.
I just want to make Vaughn, are you going to stick with us for a few more minutes?
Yeah, I'm sitting here waiting for the court to call me. So go ahead. I'll be here.
All right, let's see. Which one should we do first? Well, since we were talking about whether or not an officer is required to respond to a dangerous situation, here is an incident that is a good example of that. I don't think this was suicide. I think I really don't know for sure what it was, but some kid was on the outside of a building hanging in a very perilous situation, and a cop plus another guy went to help, but it looked pretty dangerous. Oh.
Hurry up!
So I guess it's the restaurant manager and a cop. Now, of course, if they were on level ground, there'd be no problem just holding this child, but flying through the air and possibly falling off that, whatever that thing is over the sign. So if she had fallen out a little bit more,
Yeah.
you know, the momentum might have driven one of those two guys to fall off. So that to me looks like the sort of situation where I wouldn't blame a cop who said no thanks.
Yeah.
But would a cop be mocked by the other cops later for bailing?
That's more of a fireman's sort of a job, I think. They don't mind the heights as much.
Yeah, and they have ladders.
Exactly.
What do you think, Vaughn?
The heights.
Yeah, no, I think Craig hit it earlier. Like some of this stuff, would somebody be ridiculed? No, I mean, I suppose you would just say, "Get out of my way, let me do it." We sort of had to take that tact with different officers. There's some officers who wanted to lean forward and run to the sound of gunshots, run to the fights, run to the medical emergencies. They wanted to lean forward and do the thing that cops were trained and expected to do, and they took pride in doing it. And there was officers who didn't want to do that. They just want to sit back and wait for their calls. And maybe they had a bad experience. They weren't going to have that experience twice. I had a call with a partner. There was a kid who got shot. And it was a little bit different, but it was the same thing. He's just like, I don't want to see that shot kid. Tonight, I don't have what it takes to deal with a kid who just got shot by their dad. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And he dealt with the dad. He was fine dealing with the suspect. He did not want to see that kid shot. And that's the real humanity that you have to have with your partner to understand that same guy might be a hero 300 days out of the year. And he just got a few days where he's maxed out. He didn't get sleep. Something's going on at home. That's the level of humanity you have to answer those questions. But I don't actually know. Actually, it was more the veteran cops, the guys who'd been there for a while that wouldn't do stuff like that anymore. They're like, I got nothing to prove. I ain't getting hurt. I'm too close to retirement. You'd see that kind of stuff.
Away from cashing out. So
yeah, but most of the cops we work with would all want to be on that roof. Quite frankly, they would.
Yeah, they're risk takers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the sort of personnel that's attracted to the job. All right, here is an incident that occurred a few months ago on a beach in Florida. Parents with how many kids altogether? 3 or 4 kids altogether. I forgot the exact number. Went for a walk, except they left their baby, who was about 6 months old, behind. And they were gone for about an hour. So the people on the beach noticed this, and they called the police. Now, the video I saw is very long, 20, 25 minutes, something like that, because it shows when the cops showed up, and then they're questioning people, and it just goes on and on and on. So I cut it down really short just to show the cops showing up, and then the arrest. I want to ask you guys about the arrest. Sorry, I sort of gave away the ending already, but Here it is.
This is a 6-month-old baby girl just after she was discovered on a Florida beach by a Good Samaritan. The sheriff's department says they discovered the baby had been left alone by her parents for nearly an hour.
Would you leave your 6-month-old in a car for an hour? No. Would you leave your 6-month-old at the house for an hour while you went to the store? No, you shouldn't.
Tonight, parents Brian and Sarah Wilkes have been arrested and charged with felony child neglect. Investigators say they went for a walk with their older children Friday, leaving their 6-month-old baby napping under a tent alone.
In the worst case that we could have had here was a kidnapping, and nobody would have known what would have happened before that.
Beachgoers told hotel staff, who called police. The sheriff's department says the parents told them,
"Oh, it was baby's nap time. We didn't want to disturb baby. We kind of lost track of time."
What do you make of that response?
Losing track of time doesn't negate the fact that you as a parent have the responsibility to take care of and to care for your child.
Sarah Wilkes, a healthcare executive, and her husband Brian have been released on bond. They did not respond to our request for comment. Priscilla Thompson, NBC News.
All right, here's the arrest.
Very back is where you go. But give him 1 second. He's gonna get it cranked up and running. And real quick, the phones. Yeah, go grab that. That in your cards. Yeah. That way. Yeah. Perfect.
And then you need the cards and everything too.
Yeah, because we'll just do all that. Put it all perfect. Yeah, I got it right here. So.
I can take your signal 226. The call that says there's a deputy on scene, but I don't see one on the map.
Can we sit on the same side?
Yeah, you got to be on opposite sides, unfortunately.
Yeah, you got to be on opposite sides. I'll see you at the hearing tomorrow morning.
Yep.
All right, now hang on before you comment because the audio comes back in a few seconds. I just want you to hear the end of this.
I've got the air on, so it should be cooling off here in just a minute. It's about a 45-minute ride. I'm so sorry.
If there's definitely no air on, I hate to tell
I'll try to crank it up as much as I can.
Okay, now I feel a little something, but
yeah.
All right, now we discussed earlier, I don't think it was the episode when you were here, Vaughn, but I remember asking Greg whether or not it's really always necessary to handcuff people. Because sometimes it doesn't seem like they're a danger. And he says, yeah, you should. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but basically I think you said yes, because you never know or something like that. But here we saw the police being very friendly with these people. They weren't handcuffed. The woman complained about the air conditioning. The cop apologized for what was happening. So I'm not right now making any judgments or anything. I'm just observing that it seems odd to me. What do you guys have to say about that?
Well, some departments, I mean, it's just department policy. You don't have the discretion to not handcuff someone if they're going into the prisoner conveyance van. Other departments, maybe they say it's officer's discretion. I don't know. It depends on the department. But oftentimes they don't give you the option. They just say, maybe the person could be handcuffed in front of them, a pregnant woman or obese guy or an older person. But rarely, once you take someone into custody, are they unrestrained. But I don't know what that department policy is.
Vaughn, what do you think about the way the police were being very friendly with these people?
I think there's gonna be a lot of people who look at that and think that would never happen to me. If that was me, nobody's ever been nice to me like that during an arrest. But Greg's right. The law doesn't require handcuffing. Like, it's not a constitutional requirement. There's always the authority to do it. Policy, most policies have it as a policy, but some of them include officer discretion, like putting it in the front, or if there's an injury, or and some ultimately say there are just some circumstances that you've done a threat assessment. For example, you've arrested your son for shoplifting. You're like, okay, get in the car. Whatever. It's your uncle. You know him. He's not going to do anything. You don't have to become a robot and throw him in handcuffs. If you are confident this guy is not a threat, there's still discretion. But Greg's right. Like, that is an extraordinarily rare circumstance that people don't get put in handcuffs to get put in the back of a transport van. So for you to call it out as something that's an anomaly is absolutely right. But the bottom line is the law authorizes it. Discretion always mitigates that. It doesn't they're be able to explain what those special circumstances were that justified it.
Right. So I mentioned the whole video I saw was maybe 20, 25 minutes long, and I'm sure that factored into how the cops felt about this couple. Most of the commenters are just, they just hate them because they get very angry about the negligence with the children. And I get that. But they were apologetic and cooperative, very respectful of the police. The husband several times said to the cops, I have no problem with you. I understand why you're taking this seriously, things like that. So, maybe that's why they treated him the way they did. Yeah. And also, I think the cops, at least what they said, and I guess it would be the truth, was it wasn't really their decision to make the arrest. They weren't sure whether they were going to arrest them, and they said they got the word from the higher ups that they should arrest them. Like they were on the phone.
They had the
or
option. The father could have taken the older children for the walk, and the mother could have stayed with the infant. I mean, it wasn't like, it wasn't like they were in an impossible situation. I mean, it was easily to figure out.
Yeah. They were saying the kid, it was nap time, so, and the kid naps anyway, and they weren't planning to be away that long, and time got away from them. That was basically their story. So, all right, we have just a couple of more here.
Don't forget that meme, Jeff. I'm going to be crushed.
Oh, the meme. I thought you were talking about the intro before. Sorry.
There we go.
I have to show you how to insert it because I can't always remember. Gotcha. Anyway, this was a meme that Greg found that he thought makes.
I know. I made it. I didn't find it. I made it.
Oh, you made it. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes.
Right. So the point is, if I may explain the meme, that it's not really about the intent of the assailant. It's about what the threat is. So if somebody stabs you with one intent versus another, it has the same consequence. Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, although I'm a little disappointed that the meme had to be explained because then it's a bad meme. But I thought Von Klein would appreciate the fact that regardless of who's wielding the knife, the result will be the same if someone is intent on stabbing somebody.
Yeah, I got you as soon as I saw it. I think that's exactly right. And this is another thing that's been flooding the country is in one of the efforts to reduce the number of police shootings, when they noticed about a third of them involve people who are at some level described as involved in emotional or mental health crisis.
Yeah.
But they've broadly characterized that as people who are angry, people who are intoxicated, people who are suffering from psychological and physiological impairment. To think it's so broad to capture that third. But they said in order to reduce police shootings, we need to have more compassion on this population of people in mental health crisis. And a cop is like, well, hold on, that makes them less predictable, their behavior is less certain, less amiable to de-escalation, less amiable to communication oftentimes. It makes them less rational in an effort to understand what they stand to gain or lose for the purpose of persuasion and generating voluntary compliance. So cops are like, wait a minute, these people are more dangerous and more difficult to overcome resistance and the threat that they pose. And yet they've sort of categorized like one of your considerations is whether this person was in mental health crisis, as though we shoot people because of their intent or their motive, right? No, and my friend Jamie Borden said it. He's with Critical Incident Reviews. He does the same work I do out on the West Coast. Jamie says, if the person thinks you're a piñata and they're hitting you with a bat because they want to get candy out, doesn't make them any less dangerous, right? And it's like it's an oversimplification of the issue, but we see again a lot of people being gaslit, and if you overlay that label of mental health crisis, it's like the cops are supposed to somehow do something different.
You don't get a pass because you happen to be an emotionally, mentally ill or under emotional duress. It doesn't exonerate any of your actions.
No, and I do think the sensitivity to it, and I want to be clear on this point. the CIT training, crisis intervention training, that really makes you aware of the experience of people suffering from a mental health illness or in going or in some sort of mental disturbance or crisis. That's enormously beneficial, because if I do want to engage in some de-escalation and I have discretionary time, I have to alter my tactics and alter my expectations. This was a great example in Hartford where, understand, if we want to de-escalate, we have to have containment, control, psychological and physiological contact, communication skills, the actual skills to do it, and then cooperation from the person.
Yes.
All of these officers are like, he's not cooperating. We don't have psychological contact, at least as we're reading the scene. It doesn't look like he understands the word coming out of our mouths. He has a 1,000-yard stare. He's not responsive. And the cops in their reports recognize that. So to de-escalate somebody where you don't have psychological contact is very, very difficult without time, right? And without containment. So they didn't have containment. They didn't have control. They didn't have psychological contact. And yet we still have people claiming they should have de-escalated.
Yeah. De-escalation only works when there's a certain level of cooperation on the other part.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Just getting a little message here about Thursday's show. So I will mention that when we're done. Just a couple of more quickies here.
Don't forget from our sponsor.
Oh, yeah, that too. Jesus, I'm forgetting everything. By the way, Greg, I want to say that I don't think your meme needed an explanation. I think that I explained it needlessly. And I apologize.
No
and thank you for reminding me that the latest gold news indicates that despite recent price corrections, major financial institutions view the current dip as a strategic buying opportunity within a long-term structural bull market. Gold is trading around $4,187 an ounce right now, which is about 25% below the all-time high, which occurred in January of this year. And just keep in mind that gold gained about 65% last year, the most since 1979. So we encourage you to check with our sponsor, Goldco. And Vaughn, are you a gold and silver guy or what?
Yeah, absolutely. I did gold just to sort of balance out the portfolio, and it did exactly what it advertises to do, which is as the markets go down, the gold responsiveness goes up, and of course they sort of offset each other. So in your long-term plan, the idea is you're not losing the value of your investment in that gold. It holds its value. And yeah, when you watch it go up like that, it's a good feeling, particularly when the other markets are not doing as well.
And as we mentioned last week, Greg won a lawsuit, something like $1.5 million back in, what year was it? 1923?
1995.
1995. And we took out the calculator. If he had invested that money in gold back then, it would be worth today $97 billion gazillion dollars. And Greg is kicking himself. So don't you be disappointed and live your life in regret like Greg Dillon is, folks. Visit probablecause.gold. All right, a couple more. Let's see. Here is the cops pulling over somebody at a gas station and asking a woman to get out of the car, and she doesn't want to get out of the car.
Ram in the car. Can move. Get out of the car.
Why? What did I do?
Get out of the car.
What did I do?
Get out of the car.
Why? What did I do?
Turn the car off for me. I'll talk to you in a minute.
Why? I didn't do
I'll
anything.
talk to you in a minute.
I didn't do anything.
I will talk to you in a minute.
What
You're
did I
Electra,
do,
correct?
sir?
Open the door, please.
Can you please tell me what I did? I don't understand.
I'll tell you in a second. Just open the door.
Why can't you tell me what I did?
Open the door.
Hey, can you please?
Sure, correct.
Right?
Okay. You're the owner of the car.
Yes?
Yes. Okay. So step out of the car.
Because I went over a lane?
Nah, it's all bullshit, dude.
Let me tighten it up a bit. Can you spot for me? I'm gonna move forward.
Just open the.
You just said that I went over a lane. You're trying to get me out of my car? Why?
Just.
Sir, why are you doing
Do you want me to break the window?
No!
You want me to open it?
Yeah.
Can you please explain to me why you're doing this?
Ma'am, you got,
I went over a lane?
ma'am, you got a warrant, okay?
For what?
I believe it's at Old Saybrook, Troop F's area.
Whoa, Connecticut. A lot of crime in Connecticut.
Yeah?
I don't understand why you're doing it.
Please open the door.
Why? I didn't
Step out of the car.
All right, so I've seen enough of these videos to know that it seems to me that a lot of people don't realize they're obligated to get out of the car when ordered in a situation like this. And I know that ignorance is no defense of the law, but nonetheless, it also seems to me that the police really don't want to have to break windows and pull people out. So I'm wondering if you guys agree and if maybe there's a need for some kind of public awareness campaign just to let people know that they're obligated to get out when ordered. What do you guys think?
I think it's gone the opposite. They actually have been encouraging this sort of subversion of the authority, and they do this by encouraging them. If you ask them for their ID, now the officers have to give you their name and badge number, as though when an officer shows up, he has all the authority that the statutes give him. But if you just magically say, I need your badge number and your name and badge number, that they're suddenly frozen in time now, and that you now have assumed control of that car stop, right? They say, if I ask you for your supervisor, you're done. I've just stripped you of your authority. You no longer have authority until your supervisor gets here. We have started to actually convince society that they can push back and defy these authorities. So yes,
we were talking about the supervisor thing last week.
Very well put, Juan. That's exactly what's going on. They're trying to exert control and dominance over the motor vehicle stop and take away the officer's legal authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that risk, but this is what they will say. I can hear these progressive activists saying, and these experts saying, this is officer created jeopardy. Why were they in a hurry? Slow down. Negotiate through the window. She's asking questions. Take all the time in the world to answer those questions. They could slow down. They don't need to accelerate this by breaking windows, by trying to open doors. What was the rush? What's the hurry? So everything that occurred in this is the officer's fault because they slowed down, create space, negotiated, called in additional crisis intervention people, rotate through the officers. And we had a case like this where they did it for 70 minutes. Sat there, tried to negotiate for 70 minutes, and they still charged the officer because they said he intentionally accelerated and escalated so they had an excuse to shoot them. That officer went to prison.
What, he's supposed to spend the whole week there?
Yeah, it was like 70 minutes. And so this is what these experts will come in and say, all from the same place. And in this case, I can already see this.
All right, so let me show you how the incident ends. They catch up to her, and the woman flees her car, and here's the ending.
That's the female who's booking it through the neighborhood.
Can I shut it off?
This thing, yeah. They're actually, hang on, I got it. They're going to have a dog, so.
Oh.
The resident said she's in behind 3 Strand Road.
How you doing? Do you guys happen to see the girl run? So would she run through here?
Yep, she came right behind the seat.
Yep.
Up here, straight back there. There's a lot of fallen trees and woods and a fence back there. I don't think she could have cut through that way.
Just keep everyone in the house because they're going to run the dog. Thank you.
Hey, you're gonna get bit! Show me hands, you're gonna get bit! Show me hands, you're gonna get bit! Show me hands, gonna bite you! Roll towards me now, he's gonna bite you! Come here! Go that way towards that trooper! You move, he's gonna bite you!
Don't do anything stupid, you understand me?
Oh, you got it!
Don't keep showing me your
Good boy! If you run, you're gonna get bit!
I'm not gonna run!
If you run, you're gonna get bit!
Get on there, get on your knees! Get on your knees right now! On your face! On your face! On your face!
Bring it down. Don't go down.
Just say nothing today.
And once again, a dog does the trick. Stevie Jones could have turned out different. Not Monday morning quarterbacking, just saying. Dogs may be the best bet in many instances.
Yeah. Well, did they exhaust all reasonable options, lower levels of force?
I don't know. They had a dog. That's all. How about
Yeah.
two dogs? Two dogs from coming from two different sides. The dogs aren't trained to bite them except on the arm, right, or something like that, right, or
Leg,
their
arm.
clothing. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they
Not
sort of
fatal.
bite what's available. The problem is sometimes there's no leg or arm available. What's sticking out is something more vital. So you get those cases, but dog will look for something.
All right, let's finish with a more lighthearted video clip. You guys soccer fans? World Cup is in the news lately? No?
I don't want to disrespect the World Cup. I think it's an amazing opportunity to develop unity, and I think soccer is an amazing warm-up for rugby.
Oh my goodness! You could have a career in politics. All right, here's a Boston cop demonstrating his skill with a soccer ball. All right, good community relations, but is the officer taking a risk when so many people are surrounding him in terms of keeping his gun and maybe somebody taking it?
Well, they were Scotsmen, so I think in the risk scenario, he was probably at the lower end.
Okay. Yeah. They were all Scotsmen there?
Well, most of them were wearing kilts, yeah.
Oh, all right. I didn't even notice that. Well, it's not, kilts are better than man buns. We've been watching the man bun trend in New York cops lately, Vaughn. Have you noticed that some of
in
them
the cops?
Sporting? Yeah. Two different cops in the last 2 weeks were sporting man buns.
Well, here's what I'll say. I might not like the look of it. I know I'm old at this point, but if I find a good cop and he wants to wear a man bun, the man bun is not going to be my hard line. Just like tattoos, just like whatever. If they're a good cop, the problem is those things don't always go hand in hand.
Right. Very good. Well, nonetheless, we're going to continue to monitor this trend just to see how. I want to find out.
It's on our radar now.
Just how popular it is. All right,
Although
I guess
I think the same thing about baseball hats and cops, though. By the way, I never could get used to cops wearing baseball caps, and now it's just ubiquitous. Now they all wear them. But I saw one of my.
It's part of the uniform? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
okay.
baseball cap. They did a study on what was the
cop in shorts.
Well, if you're a bike cop, I'll give it away. You can be a bike cop in shorts. But,
all right. How about a bike cop in a kilt and a man bun?
Oh boy,
that's too much. That's overkill. All right, check out Von Kliem's article at the Force Science website. Part 1 already published. Within the next few days, maybe Monday, I think you said, Von. Part 2 will be published.
Yeah, we got it scheduled to release on Monday, and then 2 weeks after that, part 3. Yeah, you guys, thanks again for covering down on this. This is we had a lot of fun today. Like I said, I'm in court right now, 3 different states in the next 6 weeks, and these issues are coming up in every single case. So this is where the fight is. The industry has to wake up and push back hard against this progressive reform agendas that in some places have been statutorily mandated without any real critical analysis of whether it could ever be operationalized. It's serious for the officers who are facing prison. So it's where the fight is. And I think all the executive leaders out there who are watching your show just need to realize it's okay to use your common sense and say this is not something we can operationalize in our industry, and push back hard against it and just say no.
Keep up the great work, brother.
All right, let's keep following this story. Our guest on the Whiners Thursday night is Stanislav Karpivnik. He's a geopolitical analyst based in Russia. That's Thursday night at 7 p.m., so tune in for that. Ask the Inspector is on hiatus. We'll be back on July 1st. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Vaughn. And thanks to our beloved audience. Take care, everybody. And don't forget to buy gold.
Good night.